The engineers using AI to write code are working more hours than they ever have. Sleep deprived, bags under their eyes. And they have never been happier. Marc Andreessen called it the AI vampire. Developers managing 20 AI coding agents in parallel, terrified to close the laptop because the opportunity cost of sleeping is too high. Every project they never had capacity for, every feature they deferred for 3 years, every automation that wasn't cost effective at the old rate, all of it unlocked at once. They are ecstatic and they look terrible. Nobody predicted this. Not the economists who study automation, not the researchers who model workforce displacement, not the people who predicted mass unemployment, and not the people who predicted a 4-day week. Both camps were confident, and both got it structurally wrong. That's the thing I want to talk about today. Not the AI angle, the failure of prediction itself, and what it tells you about how you are thinking about your own situation. The prediction was more productivity per hour means fewer hours required. It's a sensible prediction. It follows logically. It's also the same prediction that failed in 1865 when William Stanley Jevons noticed that more efficient coal engines had resulted in Britain using more coal, not less. He expected the opposite. Everyone did. The logic was airtight. Use fuel more efficiently, use less fuel overall. The logic was right. The frame was wrong. What actually happens when you make a resource cheaper or faster is that demand expands to meet it. You don't bank the savings. You find new things to spend them on. The bottleneck that was holding you back wasn't just slowing you down. It was limiting what you could even imagine doing. Remove the bottleneck and the demand behind it floods in. The developers aren't sleep deprived because they lack discipline. They are sleep deprived because there isn't finally no ceiling on what they can build. The projects that never made the cut, the features that weren't cost effective, the automations that always got deferred, none of that disappears when you get more capable. It expands. Wrong frame, correct logic inside it. Completely different outcome. I came across a story on LinkedIn last week. A cafe owner on the verge of closing, sales falling, customers not returning. And then the story goes, a billionaire gave him advice. Give the coffee away for free. He did. People came in, stayed, bought pastries, memberships, merchandise. The business turned around and started generating $50,000 a month. The post drew the lesson. Stop selling products, start building systems. That's fine as far as it goes, but it misses the actual story. The real story is buried in the setup. The cafe owner spent months, probably years, asking a question his industry gave him. How do I sell more coffee? The question is not stupid, it's internally coherent. Everything that follows from I am in the business of selling coffee is logical. Improve margins, run promotions, optimize pricing, sharpen the menu. These are real tactics. They work in the right context. The problem is, nobody goes to a cafe to buy coffee. They go to have somewhere to be, to work or to talk or to get 45 minutes away from wherever they came from. The coffee is the ticket. The experience is the product. The relationship is the thing that brings them back. Once you see that, how do I sell more coffee? And what keeps people coming back aren't variations on the same question. They describe different businesses. One is a transaction-optimized problem, The other is a relationship architecture problem. Solving the first harder will not get you to the second. The cafe owner didn't need better tactics. He needed a different question. The billionaire didn't give him that question. He handed him a tactic. Give away coffee. That happened to force the question into view by making the old frame impossible to use. The insight wasn't the tactic. It was the diagnostic collapse of the frame that made the tactic visible. I want to give this a name because it has a structure that matters. A frame trap is when the question you are asking is logically sound, internally consistent, and wrong. Not because the logic fails, but because the question belongs to a different situation than the one you are actually in. The cafe owner was running a frame built for a commodity business inside an experience business. The economists were running a frame built for fixed demand markets inside an elastic demand market. Both frames were valid somewhere. Neither was valid here. The trap is invisible from inside. That's not a character flaw. That's how frames work. They are the assumption layer underneath the questions. They determine what feels askable. You can't interrogate a frame from inside it any more than you can see your own blind spot by looking harder at it. This matters because intelligence doesn't help you escape a frame trap. It makes it worse. Smart people don't ask worse questions than everyone else. They ask better questions inside the same wrong frame. They are more efficient, more rigorous, more thorough. And they dig deeper into the wrong problem. The confidence produced by good logic operating inside a bad model is the most dangerous kind of confidence there is. Tim Denning spent years waiting for permission to write online. He was waiting for credentials, for someone to tell him it was okay, for a gatekeeper to open a door. And then he started anyway. And nothing happened. No backlash materialized. The critics he'd imagined were too distracted by their own lives to care. The colleagues he expected to think he'd lost his mind were too busy complaining about their own jobs and notice he'd left his. The frame was, the world is organized to stop ambitious people. He was not being irrational. The model is accurate in certain domains. Academia controls access. Regulated professions have gatekeepers. Some industries require credentials that genuinely function as barriers. He was applying a frame that describes those domains accurately to a domain where it doesn't apply at all. Online content creation has no gatekeepers. The friction is entirely internal. The opposition he was navigating was a model he'd inherited from watching other people's stories unfold in different contexts. And he'd never tested whether it described his actual situation. The frame felt true, so it never got examined. That's a frame trap operating cleanly. Not deception, not stupidity. An inherited model applied without testing, invisible because it felt like reality. So, what do you actually do with this? 3 things. Not tactics. Diagnostic moves. First, name the question you are asking. Then ask where you got it. How do I sell more comes from the hospitality industry's playbook. How do I get past gatekeepers comes from watching how other people's stories went in contexts where gatekeepers were real. Will this tool reduce my workload comes from a century of industrial automation logic that assumed demand was fixed. None of those are inherently wrong. They are just not the only way to frame the situation. The question is whether the inherited frame fits your actual situation or whether you're running someone else's model on your data. Trace the question back. Where did it come from? What situation was it built for? Is that situation the one you are in? The frame comes from an industry, a mentor, or an analogy that felt close enough to your situation that you never questioned it. The hospitalities industry frame is built for high-volume commodity businesses. It works perfectly when the product is interchangeable and the customer has no reason to prefer you specifically. An experience business is structurally different. The question the commodity frame generates is not wrong in itself. It's wrong for the situation. Second, look at where your predictions have been wrong. Not where your tactics failed, where your predictions failed. The times you expected something to happen and the opposite occurred. The times you were certain the market would respond a certain way, or that a certain action would produce a certain result, and it didn't. Failed predictions are frame signals. A tactic failing means the tactic was wrong. A prediction failing means the model was wrong. Cluster your prediction failures and you will find the frame they all come from. The economists didn't fail to predict the AI vampire because they lacked information. They failed because they were running a model that had never been confronted with its own failure conditions. And number 3, ask what options aren't on the table. Every frame makes some options visible. It also makes some options invisible. Not options you have considered and rejected, but options that don't register as options at all. Give the coffee away for free wasn't on the cafe owner's table, not because it was too expensive, not because he'd tried it and it had never worked, but because the frame he was operating in made it an incoherent question. Product businesses don't give their products away. That's not a rule you think. It's a rule the frame enforces without announcing itself. What are the options your current situation makes unthinkable? Start there, not because the unthinkable option is necessarily right, but because the option or the options a frame hides are exactly where the frame lives. Denning's frame made start without credentials unthinkable, not as a considered option that he'd weighted and rejected, but as a category of action that didn't exist inside his model of how the world worked. Once you identify an option as unthinkable, the next question is worth asking. Is it actually unthinkable? Or is the frame the thing doing the thinking? Contrarianism gets a bad reputation because most of it is reflexive. Do the opposite. Disagree by default. Find the hole in any argument. That's not the move. The move is more precise. Locate the question underneath the question. The inherited frame that was handed to you by an industry, a prior experience, a model borrowed from a different domain. The assumption that determines which questions even feel askable. The AI vampire isn't a story about workaholism. It's a story about what happens when the right frame is finally running. Elastic demand, infinite backlog, constraints removed. The developers aren't doing something wrong. They are doing something right inside a frame that was always accurate. They just couldn't see it until the bottleneck that obscured it was gone. The café story isn't about giving coffee away. It's about a business owner who spent 2 years solving the wrong problem correctly. Denning didn't overcome the gatekeepers. He discovered they weren't where. None of these people were being irrational. They were all being perfectly logical, inside the wrong frame. The question that changes everything isn't a smarter answer to the question you're already asking. It's the question you are carrying around without examining. What frame have you personally stopped questioning? Think about it and see you next time.